The nursery is painted a soft, duck egg blue, Jessie. I think the rocking chair should go by the window. Don't you? I didn't answer right away. I just watched her. My best friend, Jessie, was smoothing out a tiny white onesie on my bed. She looked so peaceful, so helpful. My husband, Dylan, was standing in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, a soft smile playing on his lips as he watched us. To anyone else, it was a picture of perfect support. A pregnant woman, her devoted husband, and her loyal best friend preparing for a new life. But I could feel a cold sweat prickling the back of my neck. "Jessie," I finally whispered. She looked up, her blue eyes bright. "Yeah, babe. Why is your phone buzzing in Dylan's coat pocket?" The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Dylan didn't move. He didn't blink. He just kept that same stupid smile frozen on his face, though his eyes went dead. Jessie's hand stayed rested on the tiny white sleeve of my unborn child's clothes. I'm 5 months pregnant. I'm supposed to be protected. I'm supposed to be cherished. Instead, I'm standing in a room full of lies that are suffocating me. "Oh," Jessie laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "I must have dropped it when we were bringing in the groceries. Dylan, you must have picked it up by mistake." Dylan cleared his throat, the sound like gravel rubbing together. "Right. Yeah. Sorry, honey. Just a mix-up." He handed her the phone. Their fingers brushed. It was a split second, a tiny contact, but I saw it. I saw the way his thumb lingered against her knuckle. I saw the way she didn't pull away. "My name is Ashley." And that was the moment I realized my life was a stage play, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not yet. I had learned early on that when you're being hunted, you don't make a sound. You wait. You observe. You gather your strength. That night, after they thought I was asleep, I heard the floorboards creak. Our house is old. It tells secrets if you know how to listen. I crept to the top of the stairs. The kitchen light was a dim glow, casting long, distorted shadows against the hallway wall. "She's getting suspicious," I heard Jessie whisper. Her voice wasn't sweet anymore. It was thin and sharp. "She's pregnant and tired, Jessie." "She's imagining things," Dylan replied. I could hear the clink of a glass. He was pouring a drink. "Just hold on. Once the baby is here, and the trust, the money, is settled, we do what we planned. She's too weak to fight back anyway. Look at her. She can barely walk up the stairs without panting." They laughed, a low, intimate sound that tore through my chest like a serrated blade. They weren't just having an affair. They were waiting. They were waiting for me to serve my purpose, to deliver the heir to Dylan's family estate. And then they were going to discard me like yesterday's trash. I leaned against the wall, my hand trembling over my stomach. My baby kicked, a small rhythmic thumping. "I've got you," I thought. And they have no idea who they are dealing with. They think I'm just a quiet housewife. They think I'm a girl from a small town who got lucky and married into a distinguished family. They think I'm soft, but they forgot one thing. Before I met Dylan, before I let my world shrink down to the size of his ego, I worked in forensic accounting. I know how to find things that people want to stay buried. I know how to track a paper trail until it leads to a cliff. And Dylan has a lot of paper trails. I went back to bed and stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. I let them think I was still the same, oblivious Ashley. I smiled at breakfast. I let Jessie touch my belly. I let Dylan kiss my forehead before he went to work. But inside, I was building a cage. But I had to be careful. If they knew I knew, I'd lose everything. I had to play the part of the victim perfectly until the very last second. I'm curious. Have any of you ever felt that gut feeling that someone you loved was lying, even when everything looked perfect? Where are you watching from today? Tell me your stories in the comments. And if you want to see how I turn the tables on these two, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. This is just the beginning of the end for Dylan and Jesse. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in acting. Every morning, I woke up, felt the heavy weight of my pregnancy, and looked at Dylan across the breakfast table. I'd ask him how he slept. I'd listen to him talk about his stressful meetings. I watched him check his watch, knowing he was timing his departure to meet Jesse at the coffee shop 3 blocks away. It's a strange thing, watching someone you loved turn into a stranger right before your eyes. It's even stranger when you realize they were never the person you thought they were in the first place. I spent my days resting as the doctor ordered, but I wasn't resting. Once Dylan's car cleared the driveway, I was at my laptop. I didn't use the home Wi-Fi. I used a private hotspot I bought with cash. I went back to my roots. Forensic accounting isn't just about numbers. It's about the stories people try to hide between the lines of a ledger. Dylan's family is old money. They pride themselves on a reputation of integrity and philanthropy. Dylan's father, a man who barely acknowledged my existence, had set up a complex series of offshore accounts to manage the family's wealth. Dylan thought he was being clever by skimming from them. He thought he was building a private nest egg for him and Jesse. What he didn't realize is that he was leaving digital footprints everywhere. I found the transfers every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork, small enough to avoid immediate red flags, but large enough to build a very comfortable life in a country without an extradition treaty. That was their plan. Wait for the baby, secure the final inheritance payout that comes with a male heir, and then disappear. One afternoon, Jessie came over with a box of organic teas. "You look pale, Ashley," she said, her voice dripping with that fake, sisterly concern that used to make me feel safe. Now, it made my skin crawl. "Are you taking your vitamins? You have to stay strong for the little one." She reached out to tuck a stray hair behind my ear. I didn't flinch, even though I wanted to scream. I saw the ring on her finger. It was a simple gold band, one I hadn't seen before. "That's a pretty ring, Jessie," I said, my voice steady. "New." She pulled her hand back quickly, hiding it in her lap. "Oh, this? Just a cheap thing I picked up at a craft fair. You know me, I can't resist a bargain." I knew that ring. I had seen the receipt for it in Dylan's hidden folder. It wasn't from a craft fair. It was a custom-made piece from a jeweler in the city, bought with the money meant for our child's college fund. "It's lovely," I whispered. "It looks meaningful." She laughed, that thin, sharp sound again. "It's nothing. Now, let's talk about the baby shower." I was thinking of a Garden of Eden theme. Doesn't that sound perfect? The irony was almost too much to bear. A garden full of snakes. Perfect, I agreed. As she prattled on about floral arrangements and finger sandwiches, I looked at her and realized she didn't see me as a person. To her, I was a hurdle, an obstacle to be cleared. She saw a pregnant woman who was too hormonal and too tired to notice the obvious. She saw a victim. I let her keep thinking that. That night, Dylan came home late. He smelled like Jessie's perfume, a cloying vanilla scent that I used to like. He went straight to the shower, leaving his phone on the nightstand. Usually, I wouldn't dream of looking, but the rules had changed. The messages were graphic. They were cruel. They joked about my pregnancy brain. They talked about how boring I had become. And then I saw the message that changed everything. "Jessie, did you tell the lawyer about the paternity clause?" "Dylan, already done. If she tries to sue for divorce after the birth, she gets nothing. The way I've set it up, she'll look unstable. We get the house, the money, and the kid. She gets the street." My heart stopped. They weren't just leaving me. They were planning to take my baby. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about survival. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I waited until he was asleep, his breathing heavy and arrogant next to me. I took his phone, copied the messages, and sent them to a secure, encrypted drive. Then I looked at his sleeping face. He looked so peaceful, so sure of himself. He thought he had already won. But Dylan forgot one very important thing about forensic accountants. We don't just find the money, we find the mistakes. And Dylan had made a massive one. He had been using his father's company accounts to fund his little escapades. If his father, a man who valued the family name above all else, found out his son was embezzling and risking a public scandal with a mistress, Dylan wouldn't just be divorced. He would be erased. I had the matches. I just needed to wait for the right moment to light the fire. I spent the next few days reaching out to an old contact from my professional life, a man who specialized in discreet legal maneuvers. Ashley, he said over the phone, his voice surprised. I haven't heard from you in years. What's going on? I need a favor, Mike, I said, looking out the window at the blue nursery. I need to set up a trap, and I need it to be foolproof. Who's the target? My husband, I said, and the woman who thinks she's taking my life. But every time Jessie smiled at me, I imagined her face when the bank accounts froze. Every time Dylan kissed me, I thought about the moment his father would see the ledger I was compiling. I know some of you are probably thinking, Ashley, just leave now, save yourself. But you don't understand. If I left then, I left with nothing. I left my child vulnerable. No, to win this, I had to wait until the moment of maximum impact. The day of the baby shower arrived like a fever dream. The backyard was transformed into Jessie's Garden of Eden. White silk ribbons hung from the oak trees, and the scent of expensive lilies was so thick it felt like it was coating the back of my throat. I sat in a high-backed wicker chair, draped in a flowy white dress that made me look like a fragile angel. I felt like a ghost at my own funeral. Jessie was the perfect hostess. She flitted between my mother, my cousins, and Dylan's high society friends, pouring champagne with a practiced grace. Every few minutes, she'd squeeze my shoulder or bring me a glass of water, making sure everyone saw just how devoted she was to her struggling friend. You're doing so well, Ashley, she whispered in my ear, leaning down so her hair brushed my cheek. Just a few more months, and you can have your body back. And your life. I looked up at her and smiled. I can't wait to get my life back, Jessie. You have no idea. Dylan stood by the grill, playing the part of the proud father-to-be. He was laughing with his father, the patriarch of the family wealth. I watched them from across the lawn. Dylan's father was a man of cold stone and ironclad principles. He took the family legacy seriously. He didn't believe in scandals. He didn't believe in weakness. I watched Dylan clap his father on the back, and I felt a surge of cold adrenaline. Dylan was so confident. He thought he was untouchable because he was a blood heir. He didn't realize that I had spent the previous night finishing the Black Ledger. It was a digital file that contained every penny he had diverted. It included the lease agreement for the apartment he'd secretly rented for Jessie, the jewelry receipts, and, most importantly, the evidence that he was using his father's corporate signature to authorize the transfers. It wasn't just an affair anymore. It was grand larceny. During the gift opening portion of the afternoon, the humiliation reached its peak. Jessie presented me with a large, beautifully wrapped box. Inside was a designer diaper bag, the kind that costs more than a used car. For the sophisticated mom, Jessie announced to the group. The guests oohed and awed. But as I pulled the bag out, a small silk scarf fell out from one of the side pockets. It was vibrant red, stained with a dark smudge of what looked like foundation, Jessie's specific brand. A few women in the front row noticed. The air got thin. Jessie's face went pale for a split second before she snatched it away. Oh, That must have slipped in when I was packing it. My bad, she laughed, but her eyes were darting toward Dylan. Dylan didn't look away. He stared at her with a look of such raw, hungry possession that it made my stomach turn. It was a public slip, a tiny crack in their perfect facade. The guests whispered. I could see the judgmental glint in Dylan's father's eyes as he watched the exchange. I didn't say a word. I just touched my belly and looked down, playing the role of the tired, confused wife. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Let them wonder, I thought. Let the seeds of doubt grow. That evening, after the last guest had left and the yard was littered with wilted flowers and empty bottles, I found Dylan in his study. He was staring at a bank statement, a glass of scotch in his hand. "Great party, honey," he said, not looking up. Jessie really outdid herself. "She did," I said softly, standing in the doorway. "She's very talented at creating illusions." He froze. He slowly turned his head to look at me. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just that the Garden of Eden theme was very appropriate," I replied, my voice as smooth as glass. The serpent was right there in the grass, and nobody even noticed. Dylan laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "You're being dramatic, Ashley. It's the hormones. Go to bed." I turned to leave, but I stopped at the door. "Oh, by the way, Dylan, I was cleaning the spare room today, and I found a folder in the closet, something about offshore allocations. I put it on your father's desk in the library so he could take a look at it for you. I thought it might be important for the baby's trust." The sound of Dylan's glass hitting the floor and shattering into 1,000 pieces was the most beautiful music I had heard in years. He didn't move. He couldn't. He knew his father was in the library right now, finishing his evening cigar. He knew that if his father opened that folder, the life Dylan had carefully stolen was over. "Ashley," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What did you do?" "I just tried to be helpful, Dylan," I said, a small, cold smile finally breaking through. "Isn't that what a good wife does?" I walked away, leaving him standing in a puddle of scotch and broken glass. I went to my room, locked the door, and waited. The explosion didn't happen that night. My father-in-law is a man of calculated moves. He wouldn't storm in. He would investigate. He would verify. He would wait until he had all the facts before he struck. But I knew the clock was ticking. I lay in bed, feeling my baby kick again. The power shift had begun. For months, they had treated me like a pawn. They had whispered about my weakness while I sat feet away from them. They had planned to leave me with nothing. But now, I held the leash. The next morning, Jessie called me 10 times. I didn't answer. I knew Dylan had told her. I knew they were panicking, trying to figure out how much I knew and how much his father had seen. I spent the day at a spa, getting a prenatal massage. I turned off my phone. For the first time in months, I felt light. When I returned home, the atmosphere had changed. The house felt cold. Dylan was sitting in the living room, his face gray. His father's car was gone. He saw it. Dylan said, his voice a ghost of itself, "He wants to see us both at the office tomorrow. You, me, and Jessie." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The public humiliation they had planned for me was about to be served back to them on a silver platter. The air in the executive elevator was thick enough to choke on. Dylan stood in the corner, his expensive suit suddenly looking 3 sizes too big for him. He kept adjusting his tie, his fingers twitching. Beside him, Jessie was a ghost of herself. She had tried to hide her pale skin under an extra layer of bronzer, but the trembling in her hands gave her away. She wouldn't look at me. I, on the other hand, felt a strange, icy calm. I smoothed the fabric of my dress over my 5-month bump. I was the one they had called weak. I was the one they thought would be too unstable to fight back. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open to the top floor of the Sterling Vaughan building. We were led into the main boardroom, a room of glass, mahogany, and cold ambition. Dylan's father, Thomas, was already there. He didn't look up when we entered. He was staring at a series of spread-out documents on the massive table. "Sit," Thomas said. One word. It carried the weight of a guillotine. We sat, Dylan and Jesse on one side, me on the other. It felt like a trial because it was. "Dylan," Thomas began, his voice dangerously low. "I've spent 40 years building this company's reputation. I've spent 40 years ensuring our family name meant something. And yet, I find that my own son has been treating the corporate accounts like a personal slush fund for his extracurricular activities." "Dad, I can explain," Dylan stammered, his voice cracking. The investments were non-existent," Thomas snapped, finally looking up. His eyes were like flint. "You transferred funds to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, a company whose primary expenditure seems to be a penthouse lease and a series of high-end jewelry purchases. Jewelry that, I might add, your wife is not wearing." He turned his gaze to Jessie. She shrank into her seat. "And you, the best friend. I've looked into your background, Jessie. It seems your previous employment ended under very similar circumstances. A misunderstanding with a married senior partner." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Jessie's face crumble. The poise she had maintained at the baby shower was gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. She looked at Dylan for help, but Dylan was busy looking at the floor. "But here is the real problem," Thomas continued, his voice dropping an octave. "Ashley brought me a folder. It was an interesting collection of red flags, but it wasn't complete. It was just enough to make me look. So, Ashley, I assume you have the rest of the story." This was my moment. The power shift was no longer a secret plan. It was a public reality. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, silver thumb drive. I slid it across the polished wood toward Thomas. "In that drive, Thomas, you'll find the full forensic audit I conducted over the last 3 months," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It doesn't just show the embezzlement. It shows the login credentials used. It shows that Dylan was using your private digital signature to authorize those transfers. He didn't just steal money, Thomas. He stole your identity to do it." Dylan's head snapped up. "Ashley, stop. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing, Dylan," I said, leaning forward. "I'm doing the job I was trained for. I'm protecting the assets. Only this time, the assets include my child's future." Thomas plugged the drive into his laptop. He scrolled in silence for 5 minutes. The only sound in the room was the soft click of the mouse and Dylan's ragged breathing. Jessie had started to cry, silent tears tracking through her makeup. "This is thorough," Thomas finally said. He looked at me with a new expression, not the dismissive pity he usually held for me, but a cold, hard respect. "You've been doing this while you were pregnant." "I had a lot of rest time at home," I said. "It gave me plenty of space to work." Thomas turned back to Dylan. "You're fired. Effective immediately. I'm stripping your name from the trust. You will have nothing but what you've managed to hide in those offshore accounts, which, by the way, I am freezing as we speak for a full legal recovery." "Dad, you can't." Dylan yelled, standing up. "I'm your son. She's nobody." "She is the mother of my grandchild," Thomas said, standing up to meet him. "And she is clearly the only one in this room with any sense of loyalty or competence. You and this woman are to leave this building now. Security is waiting outside." Jessie stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, ugly hatred. "You think you won? You're still alone, Ashley. You're still a pathetic, pregnant woman whose husband didn't want her." I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing but a deep, hollow pity. I might be alone, Jesse, but I'm standing on solid ground. You're standing on a sinking ship, and Dylan is the one who drilled the holes. As security escorted them out, Dylan tried to grab my arm. He was crying now, begging for a chance to explain. I didn't even look at him. I just watched the doors close behind them. The room was quiet again. Thomas looked at me and sighed. What do you want, Ashley? You didn't just do this to help me. I want the house, I said. I want full custody, and I want a seat on the board of the foundation. I'm going to make sure my child grows up knowing that dignity isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn. Thomas nodded slowly. Consider it done. I walked out of that building feeling 10 feet tall. But as I reached the sidewalk, I saw them. Dylan and Jesse were standing by the fountain, arguing. Jesse was screaming at him, pointing at her ring. Dylan was clutching his head in his hands. The house felt different that night. It was quiet, not the heavy, suffocating silence of secrets, but a vast, echoing emptiness. I sat in the nursery, the duck-egg blue walls glowing softly in the moonlight. I ran my hand over the crib, thinking about how Dylan and Jesse had sat in this very room and plotted to take my child from me. They thought I was a victim. They thought I was a soft girl who could be molded and then discarded. But as I watched the shadows stretch across the floor, I realized that the calm I felt in the boardroom was only half the story. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. 2 days later, it did. I was sitting in a small cafe, trying to focus on a book, when a shadow fell over my table. I didn't have to look up to know who it was. The scent of that cloying vanilla perfume arrived seconds before she did. Jessie sat down opposite me. She wasn't wearing her designer clothes anymore. She looked haggard, her eyes rimmed with red. "You think you're so smart, Ashley," she spat, her voice a low hiss. "You think you've won the house and the board seat and the respect of that old man. But Dylan isn't going down without a fight. He's desperate, and a desperate Dylan remembers things." I closed my book slowly. "What are you talking about, Jessie? Dylan has nothing left." "He has your past, Ashley," she whispered, leaning in. "He knows about the incident in Chicago. He knows why you really left your last firm. He knows you didn't just resign for a change of pace. He knows about the missing $40,000 that mysteriously reappeared right after you walked out the door." My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. My breath hitched. It was a secret I had buried deep, a mistake made in a moment of extreme family crisis years ago. I had fixed it. I had replaced the money, and no charges were ever filed. But the record of the internal investigation existed. Somewhere. "Dylan spent all morning on the phone with your old boss," Jessie continued, a cruel, jagged smile forming on her lips. "He's going to use it, Ashley. He's going to tell Thomas that his competent daughter-in-law is actually a common thief who just got better at hiding it. He's going to file for custody based on your criminal character." I stared at her, my mind racing. I had been so focused on Dylan's crimes that I had forgotten he was a man who specialized in finding the cracks in everyone else's foundation. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because I want out," Jessie said, her voice shaking. "Dylan has lost his mind. He's drinking. He's talking about making you pay in ways that scare me. If you give me $50,000 cash, I'll give you the file he's building. I'll give you the only copy of the internal memo he found, and then I'll disappear. I'll leave him, I'll leave the city, and you'll never see me again." I looked at my former best friend. I saw the greed, the fear, and the utter lack of loyalty. She was willing to sell Dylan out the second things got uncomfortable. "How do I know you're not lying?" I asked. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of my old resignation letter, with a handwritten note from my former boss at the bottom. The note mentioned the discrepancy and the private settlement. It was real. You have 24 hours, Ashley, Jessie said, standing up. Meet me at the old pier at sunset tomorrow. Bring the money, or Dylan goes to Thomas. And we both know what Thomas does to people who lie to him. She walked away, leaving me cold and trembling in the sunlight. I went home and sat in the dark. I could feel the walls closing in. If Thomas found out I had a history of financial discrepancies, he wouldn't care that I had saved his company. He would see me as just another liar. I would lose the house. I would lose the custody battle. I would lose my child. I looked at the black ledger on my laptop. I had used the truth to destroy Dylan. Now, the truth was being used to destroy me. But as I stared at my reflection in the dark window, I saw something I hadn't seen before. I saw a woman who had survived a betrayal by the two people she trusted most. I saw a woman who had outplayed a millionaire in his own boardroom. I wasn't a thief. I was a protector. And if Jessie wanted to play dirty, I had to remind her that I was the one who knew how to find what was hidden. I didn't go to the bank to withdraw $50,000. Instead, I went back into the digital files I had taken from Dylan's computer. I looked deeper. I looked for the things I had ignored because I thought I already had enough to win. I found a hidden folder labeled SB. Inside were recordings. Dylan, being the paranoid man he was, had recorded his private conversations with Jessie. He hadn't just been cheating with her. He had been recording her admitting to her own schemes. There was a recording of her talking about how she had set up her previous boss to get a settlement. There was a recording of her laughing about how easy I was to manipulate. And then I found the gold mine, a recording from 3 nights ago, Jessie and Dylan arguing in the apartment I had uncovered. We don't need the baby, Dylan, Jessie's voice said on the recording. We just need the leverage. Once we get the money from Ashley, we skip town. Let her keep the kid. I don't want to be a stepmom to your brat anyway. The betrayal went even deeper than I thought. Jessie wasn't just a mistress. She was a predator who didn't even want the life she was fighting for. I had my countermove. The next day, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, bloody streaks across the water, I walked out onto the old pier. The wind was cold, whipping my hair across my face. Jessie was waiting at the end, her back to the water. Do you have it? She demanded as I approached. I have something better, I said. I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Jessie's own voice echoed across the wooden planks, talking about how she didn't want my brat. I watched the color drain from her face until she was as white as the foam on the waves below. You think $50,000 is your ticket out, Jessie? I said, stepping closer. This recording is going to Dylan, and to the police, and to your next potential employer. You're not getting a cent from me. You're getting exactly what you deserve. You can't, she whimpered. Dylan will still tell Thomas about Chicago. Let him, I said. I've already told Thomas myself. I called him an hour ago. I told him everything. The mistake, the settlement, the truth. And you know what he said? Jessie shook her head, her eyes wide with terror. He said he'd rather have a woman who made a mistake and fixed it than a son who hides behind lies. I said, he's standing right behind that pillar, Jessie. He wanted to hear your demand for himself. Thomas stepped out from the shadows, his face a mask of cold fury. The look on Jessie's face was the first payment on the debt she owed me. But it wasn't the last. The sound of the waves crashing against the pier felt like a countdown. Jessie looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting between me and Thomas. The arrogance that had fueled her just 24 hours ago had evaporated, leaving behind something small and brittle. Thomas, she started, her voice trembling. Don't, Thomas said. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in it silenced her instantly. I have spent my life dealing with people who think they can leverage the truth for profit. You are nothing but a bottom feeder, Jesse. You didn't just betray your friend. You tried to extort a family you were never a part of. He looked at me, then back at her. The police are already at Dylan's apartment. Since he was using corporate funds to pay for your hush money lifestyle, they have quite a few questions about your involvement in his embezzlement. I'd suggest you find a very good lawyer. Though, I imagine you can't afford one now. Jessie didn't wait. She turned and stumbled down the pier, her heels clicking frantically against the wood until she disappeared into the shadows of the parking lot. I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over me. I leaned against the railing, the cold salt air stinging my lungs. Thomas walked over and stood beside me, looking out at the dark water. "You took a big risk, Ashley," he said, telling me about Chicago. "You knew I could have used that to take the baby myself." I knew, I whispered, but I realized that if I kept hiding, I was no better than Dylan. I didn't want my child to grow up in a house built on secrets. I'd rather be a woman with a scarred past than a woman living a lie. Thomas nodded slowly. Honesty is a rare currency in my world. Dylan never understood that. He thought power was about what you could get away with. He didn't realize that true power is about what you can stand up to. He reached into his coat and handed me a set of keys. "The locks on the house have been changed. Security is posted at the gates. Dylan won't be coming back. And as for your seat on the board, I expect to see you in the office on Monday. We have a lot of damage to control." I watched him walk away, his silhouette straight and unyielding. I was safe, for now, but as I drove home, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a dull ache in my chest. I had won the house, the money, and the career, but I was 5 months pregnant, alone, and the two people I had loved most in the world were now my greatest enemies. The house was dark when I arrived. I walked through the rooms, looking at the duck-egg blue nursery, the expensive furniture, the life I had fought to keep. It felt like a museum of a ghost story. I sat on the floor of the living room and finally cried. Not for Dylan, and certainly not for Jessie. I cried for the version of myself that had been so naive. I cried for the girl who thought that loyalty was a given and that love was a shield. The next morning, I was woken up by a frantic pounding on the front door. I checked the security feed. It wasn't Dylan. It was a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, dressed in a sharp professional suit. I opened the door, the chain still in place. "Can I help you?" "Are you Ashley?" the woman asked. She looked breathless. "I'm Martha. I was Dylan's personal assistant for 3 years. I heard what happened at the office. I saw the security escort him out. Ashley, listen to me. He started, his hands out as if to ward off a blow. I did it for us. I did it for the family. Thomas would have bypassed me if we didn't have an heir. I just wanted to give you everything." "You didn't give me anything, Dylan," I said, standing up. The moonlight caught the edge of my silhouette. "You stole my choice. You violated my body. You treated my child like a transaction." "It doesn't matter," he hissed, his voice dropping into that familiar, cruel tone. "The paperwork is filed. Thomas believes it's his grandson. If you tell him the truth, he'll disinherit you both. You'll be back in that tiny apartment with nothing but a baby you can't afford. Is that what you want?" "You still don't get it," I said. I stepped into the light. "I've already spoken to the board. And I've spoken to the clinic's legal department. They've agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity from my civil suit." I held up my phone. "And I'm recording this, Dylan. Every word." He lunged for me, but I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. 2 security guards stepped out from the dining room shadows, men Thomas had sent to protect the asset. They pinned Dylan against the wall before he could even touch me. "You're done," I said. "I'm filing for an annulment based on fraud. I'm taking the house, the trust, and I'm keeping the Sterling name. Not because of you, but because my child deserves the legacy you tried to corrupt. You're going to sign a full termination of parental rights. Now, and if I don't, Dylan spat, even as he struggled against the guards. Then I released the evidence that you were involved in your cousin's accident to avoid him talking. I said, it was a bluff. I didn't have proof of that, not yet, but I saw the way his eyes widened. I saw the flicker of genuine, soul-deep terror. I had found the crack in his foundation. He signed. His hand shook so hard the signature was barely legible, but it was done. He was gone, erased from my life and my child's future. As they dragged him out for the last time, I sat in the quiet nursery. I touched my belly. The baby kicked, a strong, defiant movement. It's just us now, I whispered, and we're going to be just fine. But the final move wasn't mine. It was Thomas's. He called me later that night. His voice sounded older, tired. I heard what happened. Ashley, I know about the donor. My heart stopped. And I don't care about the blood. Thomas said, I care about the fire I saw in you today. You protected this family better than any Sterling ever has. The board has made their decision. On Monday, you aren't just taking a seat. You're taking the chair. The morning of the board meeting was crisp, the kind of air that feels like a fresh start. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the master bedroom, the room that used to feel like a cage, but now felt like a command center. I wasn't wearing the flowy, ethereal white dresses of the fragile pregnant wife anymore. I wore a tailored charcoal suit that commanded respect before I even opened my mouth. I looked at my reflection and didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out forged in steel. When I entered the Sterling Vaughn boardroom, the atmosphere was electric. The same directors who had looked past me for years were now sitting up straight, their eyes following my every move. Thomas was at the head of the table, but as I approached, he stood up and gestured to the leather chair at the center. The floor is yours, Ashley, he said. I sat down. I didn't rush. I let the silence settle, a tool I had learned to use with surgical precision. For months, I began, my voice steady and resonant. I was a ghost in this family and this company. I was underestimated because I was kind, and I was dismissed because I was a woman carrying a child. But while those who sought to destroy me were busy counting their stolen money, I was counting their mistakes. I laid a single folder on the table. It wasn't the black ledger. It was a new strategic plan, one that focused on transparency, ethical investments, and reclaiming the integrity Dylan had nearly liquidated. The scandal involving Dylan and Jesse has been contained. I continued. Dylan has signed away his rights and his claims. Jesse has fled the city to avoid a grand jury summons. They are the past, this child, and the future of this company is the present. The vote was unanimous. As I walked out of the building that afternoon, the sun was bright against the glass skyscrapers. I felt a vibration in my pocket, a message from an unknown number. You think you've won everything, Ashley, but you're all alone in that big house with a baby that isn't even a real Sterling. Enjoy your hollow victory. I knew it was Dylan, likely from a burner phone in some cheap motel. I didn't delete it. I didn't feel a sting of pain. I felt a wave of cold, crystalline clarity. I typed back. I didn't win a house, Dylan. I won my life. And as for the Sterling name, it's finally in the hands of someone who knows what it's worth. Don't contact me again. The next person you speak to will be my process server. I blocked the number. I drove back to the house, my house, and went straight to the nursery. I sat in the rocking chair by the window, the one Jessie had tried to use as a prop for her lies. I looked at the blue walls and realized they didn't fit anymore. We're going to paint this room gold, I whispered to my belly. because you aren't a secret and you aren't a pawn. You are a king. The revenge I had sought wasn't just about bank accounts or boardroom seats. It was about the moment I stopped caring what they thought of me. Dylan and Jesse are out there somewhere, rotting in the bitterness of their own making. They have each other. And in their world, that is the worst punishment imaginable. They will spend the rest of their lives wondering when the next blow will fall, looking over their shoulders, realizing that the weak woman they tried to break was the one who held the axe all along. I am Ashley. I am a mother, a CEO, and a survivor. Justice isn't always a gavel hitting a block. Sometimes it's just the sound of a key turning in a lock that no one else has a duplicate for. Thank you for listening to my story. If this journey moved you, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that like button. It helps me tell more stories of strength and justice. I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were smarter than you? What was your payback moment? If you enjoyed this story, you won't want to miss our next video. Click the link on the screen to watch it now.